The Regiment d'Isembourg was a French unit made up almost entirely of German, Russian, Spanish, Austrian, and other prisoners of war. It had a rough service and was disbanded shortly after the Bourbon Restoration. The regiment was formed on November 5, 1805, as a part of Napoleon's decree of the same date. The regiment formed in the town of Mainz and would be composed solely of foreigners and was explicitly restricted from recruiting French soldiers into its ranks. It would be the second foreign regiment created out of the November 5th decree. The unit was to be made along light infantry regulations, at the time giving it 7 chasseur companies, 1 voltigeur company, and 1 carabinier company. They would later adapt to 6 companies in 1810, 2 years later than the rest of the French light infantry. Prince Charles Frédéric Louis Maurice of Isembourg was tasked with creating the regiment. And yes, I did say Isembourg. Apparently the French Ministry of War was very lazy in checking the spelling of their documents, and therefore this regiment was called the Isembourg for its entirety of its service. Officers were found wherever they could be, with even some criminals entering the officer ranks. Prince Charles actually released applications for people to join his officer corps, and received so many applications over the first year that he had to close it down. These 2 factors led to Prince Charles having to defend himself numerous times over various controversial appointments, leading to Napoleon's March 12th decree that all future appointments must get Napoleon's permission first. The rank and file of the regiment was of course made up of all sorts of ethnic groups from across Europe. It was documented that when the recruiters went to foreign camps, the Austrian POWs took up a bribe for service, getting paid a heavy sum up front and another sum after 6 months of service. The Russians, however, wouldn't participate until they were starved and promised rations in the new regiment. Regardless of how they joined, the regiment had 3 full battalions in service within a year and a half. The organizational order describes the uniforms as, quote, having the same cut as those of the French regiments of light infantry. The color will be sky blue with a yellow collar, white piping, and buttons and sky blue lining, end quote. The yellow collar is a particular reference to French voltigeurs, so it's quite odd that an entire regiment had the yellow collar rather than that being reserved for the elite voltigeur company. The chasseurs wouldn't be given a plume, just a small red ball to the top of their hats, and the carabiniers, being light infantry, tended to prefer the usage of bearskins over shakoes during their service. The musicians and drum majors were clad in especially rich clothing and mostly made up of a yellow color. There was even a notation of the unit wearing sandals after being deployed in the Mediterranean for so long, and in 1813 there was a failed attempt to clothe the entire regiment in dark green clothing with light blue cuffs to reduce the cost of the uniforms. However, only the Depot Battalion adapted to this uniform change. The regiment paraded on March 10, 1806 with 2 full battalions, and the regiment numbering 3,000 men. The men all appeared in great shape, however trouble was constantly brewing, with then-Colonel Prince Charles remarking, quote, our regiment, which now had its full complement of 3,000 men, counted in its ranks every representative of European nationality. It was a collection of the worst possible specimens of humanity. Each day was marked by some sensational development, such as a murder or theft or desertion carried out in extraordinary circumstances. End quote. These crimes would continue to follow the unit for the rest of its existence. They were deployed for garrison duty in various sections of Italy in May of that year, moving around and shifting with different orders. The most exciting thing that happened during this garrison duty was a formal inquiry from the French government over the handling of the unit's money, in which Prince Charles was forced to pay 93,000 francs in order to rectify bad spending of the treasury. In October of 1807, the unit was finally deployed, with 3 battalions traveling to Naples to partake in the campaign brewing there. To add some background, southern Italy was a calm battleground between 2 constantly ignored theaters of war, with both the British and French governments fighting over control of Sicily and Naples and the straits in between. A voltigeur company of the regiment was deployed in the capture of Capri against the British in 1808. 3 officers were killed in the action, but all other casualties were light. The rest of the regiment was still busy in anti-partisan activities across the Nepalese countryside. In early 1809, Murat had also discovered financial wrongdoing in the regiment, where its numbers were over-reported by 400 men. This was a major problem because the regiment was receiving funds, food, and other equipment for men that didn't exist. Murat caused further problems in the regiment by taking its best men for his own personal guard. Later that year, Napoleon made a 4th battalion of Austrian POWs captured during the Danube campaign in the War of the Fifth Coalition. This battalion was sent to Spain with the Prussian regiment created by Prince Charles of Isembourg, otherwise known as the 2nd foreign unit he made after leaving the Isembourg regiment back in 1807. This 4th battalion would constantly leak deserters throughout the entire Spanish campaign, with the Germans becoming known as intense guerrilla fighters since they would be executed if captured. That was the exact fate of 29 members of the unit, but it still didn't deter an entire company from deserting in 1810. The next year, the battalion was recalled to France. On June 25, 1809, the British approached a small French garrison in southern Naples, and the soldiers of the Isembourg Regiment started a mutiny that would spread to the rest of the small garrison. The British arrived before any serious damage could be done, but it's quite clear that this regiment was never really on its best behavior, and this incident served to lower its reputation. The other three battalions continued to fight against brigands, thieves, and other lowlifes in Naples until 1810, when they were finally compliant with new French light infantry standards of 6 companies per battalion. This created a total of 6 battalions to the excess companies. 3 would be deployed in Naples, 2 to the Greek island of Corfu, and 1 would still be serving in Spain, although more in reserve. The unit was reorganized throughout the year 1811, with an artillery and pioneer company being raised on Corfu. The 3 Naples battalions and 1 Spanish battalion were sent to the Observation Army of Central Italy. In 1813, the elite companies of this regiment would form an ad hoc battalion and participate in the Battle of Mulbach honorably, while also fighting in northern Italy, which we will talk more about later. The unit would stick around in the Bourbon Restoration for a short period of time before being disbanded. Overall, a very dull service for a regiment that is so unique in uniform choice and ethnic composition. The regiment unfortunately received no battle honors. Their first commander was, of course, Prince Charles d'Isembourg. Charles was born in 1766 and entered military service in 1781, when he joined a military school at Colmar. He served in the Austrian army for a period of 10 years, from 1784 to 1794, when he resigned as a lieutenant colonel. In 1803, he joined the Prussians and was quickly promoted to major general, but decided to enter French service in 1804. On November 1st, 1805, he was given the rank of colonel and ordered to start the creation of the Isembourg Regiment. On December 12th, 1806, he was promoted to brigadier general and sent to the Army of Italy. In 1807, he joined the Ocean Corps of Observation and went to Spain almost exactly a year later. He would stay there for a short period of time, going on leave due to illnesses in May of 1809, and finally resigning in 1813. He would die in 1820 due to health complications. The second colonel of the regiment was Colonel William O'Mara, who was an Irishman in French service. He was technically a French citizen and therefore in violation of Napoleon's order not to have Frenchmen in the service. But regardless, William served as a major of the regiment since its creation, and therefore his promotion to colonel was completely logical. At the age of 43, he took command, and was only there for a year before being promoted to aide-de-camp to Marshal Lannes in 1808. He would become an officer of the Legion of Honor on the 18th of July, 1809, following the end of the Austrian front, and he would be made a Baron of the Empire a month later, and a Brigadier General on the 13th of July, 1813. He would be given command of the 1st Brigade of the 23rd Infantry Division under the French 1st Corps. The brigade was composed of the 21st Line Infantry and the 85th Line Infantry, with 4 battalions each. I unfortunately couldn't find out his exact ending, but he seems to have been assigned to the Dutch theater of war with some elements of the 1st Corps in 1814, and he didn't appear, at least where I could find him, in orders of battle for the Waterloo campaign. After 9 months of lacking a colonel, Philippe Jacques Styler de Landeville, or Baron de Landeville, took command. He was born in 1772, making him the youngest of the colonels of the regiment. Philippe rose the ranks of the army after enlisting as a mere private and would leave the Isembourg Regiment to lead the 14th Light Infantry Regiment throughout the German Wars of Liberation, specifically at Leipzig. He was wounded in March of 1814, and the 14th ended up in Corsica of all places for the 100 Days campaign. There's an interesting booklet containing information of the 100 Days written by Philippe, who oppressed Bonapartist sentiments on the island and was placed under arrest by Napoleon's brief government and then freed in the Second Bourbon Restoration. He would die in 1847. Colonel Adrien Francois Mayer, born in 1769, took command of the regiment on the 28th of January, 1813, and would lead it until the regiment was disbanded. He was a native of Holland, making him the second actual foreign colonel of the regiment. Mayer was a part of a long line of military careers, and his young childhood was dominated by him switching to regiments and detachments that his male relatives had served in. He joined the Dutch army at 16 and moved around quite frequently, finally settling in the Grenadier Company of the Bedalks Regiment as a sergeant at the age of 18. Meyer served honorably in the Dutch army during the War of the First Coalition and was captured in 1794 after the fall of Charleroi. He was freed in 1795 and returned to what was now the Batavian Republic as a second lieutenant and was soon promoted to regimental staff. Meyer served as the aide-de-camp to a brigade for the 1799 campaign and 1800 campaign in Germany. After the end of the Second Coalition, Meyer saw multiple deployments in Wallachia and Zeeland, where sickness ravaged his command. In 1805, he was sent with General Bruce of Holland to Vienna to congratulate Napoleon on winning the Battle of Austerlitz. In 1806, he was appointed lieutenant colonel and took command of the 9th 1st Infantry Battalion the next year. The 9th sported the white uniforms of Holland with black cuffs, collars, and chest pieces. His battalion fought in the 1807 campaign in Germany, but Meyer was eventually sent back home in 1808 to lead a depot battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment. He dispatched men to repel the British in 1809, and later that year he was recommended for a rank in Holland's Imperial Guard, which would have set his life down a very different path, but he was not chosen. In 1810, Holland would be absorbed by France, and Meyer was appointed a major in the 124th Line Infantry Regiment, composed almost entirely of former Dutch soldiers. At the same time, Meyer's son, Jacques, had finished military academy and was deployed with the 60th Line Infantry Regiment in Spain. Meyer was then promoted and ordered to Versailles, where he would await his next command and partied with members of the former Guard Grenadiers, with whom he had become very attached. In 1812, he was appointed to a conscription committee for a brief stay in the Italian Alps, where he experienced sickness and death among his fellow colleagues. And then finally he was sent to Isembourg, taking command of the unit in early 1813. Meyer was strongly disappointed that he wasn't able to participate in the campaigns of 1813 and requested multiple times that his regiment be deployed in Italy, but he was always denied. His son Jacques, on the other hand, was commissioned in the 13th Hussars as a first lieutenant and captured near Berlin. Meyer was strongly saddened by the news, but continued his work, reducing his 10 elite companies down to just 2, and using the excess men to form an elite battalion, which was remarked as, quote, "This was one of the most beautiful and complete battalions I ever beheld. It was 1,200 men strong, newly clothed and equipped, and extremely well officered." Meyer would finally be granted to go on campaign, taking 2 6-pounder cannons and their artillery crews, as well as 2 final elite companies to serve as reinforcements for the Army of Italy. He was also granted command of the previous sent elite battalion and 2 other elite battalions formed from other foreign regiments. He was ordered continuously around the Italian countryside, and unfortunately a lot of desertions were committed, even among elite units. One unit suffered 60 desertions in a single night, and one of the Voltigeur companies from Isembourg was completely cut off and surrendered to 600 Austrians, which prompted a general retreat by Meyer's small command. Due to desertions, sickness, and casualties, Meyer reformed his command down to just 2 battalions, and he continued to serve until Napoleon's abdication in 1814. He would end his service in France after being besieged in Rome by Murat's Neapolitan army, which had betrayed Napoleon in 1813. Meyer returned to the Dutch Republic, where he was promoted to Major General and Governor of Breda. He commanded a reserve brigade and therefore took no part in the Waterloo campaign. He did, however, serve against Belgium in 1830 and 1831, and would retire 7 years later and be knighted by King William II in 1842, just 3 years before his death in 1845. I'd like to take a moment to thank Guy Dempsey's book, Napoleon's Mercenaries, Foreign Units in the French Army under the Consulate and Empire, 1799 to 1814, which helped me immeasurably in the research of this content, and I will definitely be using his book in the future. Thank you and goodbye.